Raina MacIntyre, you're a recipient of previous Medical Research Future Fund grants, and you've been unsuccessful in a quite significant grant application. Can you just explain for us, very simply, what that application was and what the impact would be?
Sure. So it was for an AI early warning system for pandemics called EpiWatch that we've developed at UNSW since 2016 with just stop-start ad hoc funding. But it's so amazing that it's had, international recognition. We've had a contract with the US military, and it's won a bunch of awards. So the grant we applied for was to take its capabilities to the next level, the AI capabilities with different kinds of analytics and automatic red flagging, and also developing a disinformation and sentiment tracker in the health domain, which is super important today because we've got falling vaccination rates, rising health disinformation about vaccines particularly, and that kind of capability would allow us to see it happening in real time and be able to act really quickly to counter disinformation and the effect it has on communities.
So this is research which is actually potentially with international partners. You mentioned the US military was involved or would be involved. So what's the consequence of the inaction? What happens now? You talked about low vaccination rates. We've just come out of a pandemic. You've been the face of that in many ways in terms of how we address that. Does it just sort of lead to our constant unpreparedness?
There's the unpreparedness, but for us personally, with this kind of really pioneering innovation that is recognized as the best of a small number of available technologies around the world. There's nothing like it in Australia. The only reason we still have the system and personnel around it is that we've had philanthropic funding from a Canadian philanthropist, and we've had a contract with the US military. That's the only reason we're still standing. So it'd be great to be able to tap into MRFF funding if the cap were lifted.
With the cuts to funding with the NSF and NIH, does that, and then the cap on the MRFF, which is inexplicable at this point in time, and we're waiting for government to explain that, does it just make it harder for research to be undertaken in Australia? And are there any alternatives for funding in Australia?
I think it's had an enormous impact, the loss of not just NIH and NSF, but also USAID funding. Significant proportion of our researchers have had long-term funding from NIH or USAID, sort of 10, 15-year projects. In my institution alone, people have lost their jobs and lost their research funding from US sources. So it's urgent that we kind of fill that gap, and the lowest hanging fruit to fill that gap is uncapping the MRFF.
And it also must put us behind. We will fall behind if we don't actually be at the vanguard of this type of research.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity. I mean, Australia's always batted above its weight in research, but in medical research, but there's also the US is going to start falling behind now because of some of the anti-science positions taken.
So there's an opportunity.
So there's an opportunity for us to really strengthen our research sector.